Hi, and welcome to SPED Homeschool Conversations. My name is Peggy Ployer, and we're together again, and I just want to thank you for joining us, those of you who are joining us live on our broadcast on the SPED Homeschool Support Group on Facebook, and for those of you who are joining us via podcast or on YouTube through this recorded session. So I'm excited tonight to be able to introduce you and to our guest. So I'm going to bring her up here on the screen and welcome you, Beverly. This is Beverly Parrish. Thank you for joining us tonight. We are going to have a wonderful conversation tonight about reading and dyslexia, which is a very hot topic in education just in general, but also in homeschooling. And so we're going to be talking about that, and just from your experience, and hopefully we can get answers to a lot of people's questions as they're watching. And I know we already have one up in the feed that we'll get to in just a little while, but I just want our audience to get to know you and also to understand how you got involved with the Davis program, and also just understanding dyslexia as much as you do. And I know that has a lot to do with your own children. So if you could share a little bit about that story and then just where that took you from there.
Okay, great. I'd be happy to. So I have 7 kids, and 6 boys and 1 girl. And we began homeschooling 28 years ago, and my second son, we didn't know anything at the time, and he struggled to read and we were using Abeka, which was an excellent phonetically sound program, and he wasn't getting it. And we thought, gee, something's wrong. And he would be in tears, or I would be in tears at the end of the day. It's not your typical happy homeschool moment. So we stopped for a while. My husband said, what does Luke enjoy about our homeschool? And I said, well, he enjoys it when I read aloud to him. So we stopped everything, read aloud to him. Still weren't quite certain that dyslexia was his issue, but backing off for about 6 months and just reading aloud to him sort of let the waters cool down, and we tried again, and we found a multisensory phonetic approach, which really connected with him, and he kind of took off reading. So we thought, oh, we've got this dyslexia thing down. We know what we're doing. And then another son came along who struggled to read, and he wasn't reading at 7, 8, 9, and we thought, no worries. He'll read at 9, just like Luke. And 9 came and went, 10 came and went, 11, 12. At 13, he still was struggling so much. On a good day, reading 3-letter words and writing his name in a mirror, and so very much being troubled and held back by dyslexia. Through that time, we knew that we needed a really sound Orton Gillingham-based phonics program, and we can talk about that a little later. And
yeah, definitely.
We had private tutoring. We had speech therapy because he had a bit of a stutter, which is sometimes common with a dyslexic learner. We had gotten the Erlen overlays. We had brain training, which was similar to like Learning RX.
Right. And
we just felt like we tried everything, and nothing was really connecting. And so I had read the book, The Gift of Dyslexia by Ron Davis, and thought, this is just bizarre, and set it aside. And we went about our merry way trying other things. And a friend of mine had put her son through the Davis program and called me to tell me how dramatically his reading had improved and his attitude as well. And she said, you need to read this book. And I said, nah, I've already read it. She said, read it again. So I respected her. I read it again. I thought, oh my word, this is my child. How did I not see my child? So we took him to a facilitator, and he went through the program, and it was the piece of the puzzle that really made everything come together for him. And I appreciated the attitude of the Davis program, because it was not a model. It's not there's something wrong with you that we need to correct. It's you learn in a very unique way, and we can use that to your advantage, teach you how to control your thinking so you can compete on an even footing in the academic world. So his experience was so profound, and the Davis method was so different from everything that we had tried before. Not that the other things were bad, but it was just so different that I was just kind of hooked, because I have a lot of dyslexia in my family, and I thought, if nothing else, I want to become licensed to be a facilitator so I can help my family. Mm-hmm. And here and there, if I have the opportunity to share that with other kids, great. And so, went through the training, and subsequently had another son who's dyslexic. We determined that my husband's dyslexic. Mm-hmm. So it's just been this big thing, and really fits in nicely with kind of our philosophy of home education, where we really want to tailor to a kid's strength rather than endlessly focusing on their weakness. So I set about, through all the years from the first dyslexic son to the last dyslexic son, sort of self-educating and just reading everything I can get my hands on, and trying to connect the dots between a variety of ideas about what dyslexia is all about and how we should best remediate it, or how we should best accommodate, or whatever. And so that's kind of how I came to be a student of how a dyslexic person learns. That's kind of how I got to be here.
Yeah, and I talk to so many moms. Our kids take us through these situations that force us to learn so that we can help them. And like you said, there were so many different approaches, and it's good to know what all those approaches are, and to take that step back. That was so wise of you to, just take some time to reevaluate what's going on here, and then enter the situation peacefully and informed.
After the panic, guys.
Well, we tend to jump into, the next best thing when we're in a panic mode, and we spend too much money, we stress our kid out, and we stress ourselves out, and it's not good for anybody. And
right.
And so definitely. And so hopefully we can kind of go through some questions, and I have a large list of them that I know that I hear all the time about reading and dyslexia, that parents tend to just are always throwing out, because they are so common, and especially not being trained as reading teachers. We're parents. I know when I first taught my kids how to read, I don't even know how I learned to read. So how am I supposed to teach them? I mean, I'm a whole word reader. I don't do phonics, and I never was taught phonics. And so that just threw me for a loop when I started that process. So I thought I would start by asking you, what are the common characteristics for a child that I guess would be diagnosed dyslexic, or, kind of exhibit traits that might put up a flag saying this child might have dyslexia?
Okay, so that's a great thing to look for, and as we look at our kids, we want to look for these signs, if you will, of dyslexia, and we also want to bear in mind their age, and because young readers often show all these signs of dyslexia, and they're just immature children, and they will grow out of it. So parents often hear, just wait and see, but we don't want to wait. We don't want our children to fall behind. So I think that common things that a dyslexic learner will present with, if you will, is they have difficulty with rhyming words. They don't hear accurately the sounds, and so if you're reading a poem to your child and they have difficulty like filling in a rhyming word, that's kind of a red flag. That's something that we used to do with our kids a lot, is read poetry. We don't do that so much anymore. So is it a question to get them familiar with that process? So we need to be sure they're familiar with what a rhyming word is. But oftentimes they have difficulty with rhyming. They have difficulty recognizing the different parts in the sound of a word, like red. They have difficulty hearing d. They have difficulty segmenting those sounds. Now, obviously, that's not something that we are going to test our children on, but when you begin phonics instruction, it can sometimes be evident that this child has difficulty determining which sound each letter is making and then putting them together or taking them apart, which is part of learning to read phonetically. Visually, you're going to see some switching of letters, and sometimes kids will tell us the letters seem to move or they seem to fade in and out. And we typically say, no, they don't. Well, we're not seeing through their eyes, and they may be very accurately communicating to us what the letters are doing. Often a dyslexic child will use unusual words when they're speaking it's like they put their sentences together in a very unique way. And it's not exactly wrong, but it's just not the most commonly used way of phrasing something. So we might, hear that kind of thing. Oftentimes they stutter. And I did want to address one thing as we're talking about the things to look for, because I think I increasingly hear this is kind of deviating from your question a little bit, but I increasingly hear this, and I think it's a bigger issue of dyslexia that needs to be addressed. So the definition of dyslexia is difficulty with reading despite normal intelligence and adequate instruction. So usually we don't have a problem with determining whether our child is of average intelligence, but the adequate instruction is sometimes an iffy area. If we have pulled our child out of a public or a traditional school setting, it's quite possible that they did not have adequate instruction, because schools are not teaching in a thorough phonetic Orton-Gillingham-based way any longer, because it takes time and they have other things to do.
Right.
So there's a lot of
switching methods from year to year, and so the child doesn't get that constant repetition that they need either.
Yes. Well, and as you said, you learn to read in a whole word fashion as opposed to phonetics. So there have been periods of time I've learned to read phonetically. So depending on how old you are, you may not have ever learned, as you said, to read phonetically yourself. So when your child comes home from school and is struggling, you don't know whether he's actually learning with a thorough phonics program. So my point is, that's the first thing I always ask people when they tell me that they think their child's dyslexic, or they just know their kid's dyslexic and they want a Davis program or they want a tutoring or something, is tell me about how they learn to read. And it's a concern for us as homeschool parents too, because sometimes we moms, we say, I taught this child to read, and we just sat next to each other and I pointed out words, and that's not sufficient for all of our kids, and that's not thorough instruction. So we want to be sure we're following a well laid out plan. So an Orton-Gillingham based plan is systematic, direct instruction, multisensory, and intensive, and that means it follows an orderly progression, introducing the phonics rules in a systematic way. We're actually directly teaching rather than letting the child just discover as he comes to a word that he's unfamiliar with and we just tell him how to pronounce it. We are directly teaching. It's multisensory, so we're either using fingers in shaving cream or clay or magnets or something. We're using some multisensory component, and then we're drilling. And we homeschool moms are all about the concept, and we don't like to drill. And so sometimes even our kids have not had thorough instruction. So what they need is not some kind of remediation. What they need is thorough instruction, and bam, their dyslexia might go away. But in that case, it probably wasn't dyslexia at all. It was just not enough thorough instruction.
That's a very good point, because I think we tend to just say my child has a reading problem, it must be dyslexia, and we want to blame the program too, but sometimes sometimes it is the program. The program isn't thorough enough, or else I remember buying one curriculum and I looked at the instructions and went, there's no way I can do this, and I just tossed it out. Because it was so intensive. I thought, that's not going to go. But the hands-on stuff. When my son and I we read through The Gift of Dyslexia, and I did the clay stuff with him, and though that made so many connections for him, and he was 16 when we did that, but he needed that hands-on, rolling out the clay, making the letters, and especially those small words that he couldn't picture. Yeah. And so in your mind, is dyslexia really a disability, or is it just another way the brain approaches learning?
Well, I think it's another way the brain approaches learning. However, it is a disabling condition in a typical school setting where they can't accommodate that kind of learning. So I don't want to trivialize the struggle of a dyslexic learner. given the right tools, then, as I said earlier, they can compete on equal footing with a more left brain learner. I'm like the total left wall of left brain sequential, that kind of learner. And as I said, this was the thing that appealed to us about the Davis program, that it was not a deficit model, because it recognized this is an amazing way of viewing the world. They're kind of typically global thinkers. And so not just with objects can they, they're the ones who put together the Legos without the instructions, when they're 6. They're the ones who do that. But not just with objects, but with concepts and problems and unique ways of looking at things and inventions. They're the ones who see these atypical ways of putting things together that the rest of us miss. And I don't think we should get rid of that. But we do have to accommodate the fact that typical learning can be a challenge to them. So my vote is it is a gift, but we do need to support them so they can, use that gift to their advantage.
So that leads me to the next question. So what are some ways that parents can help their children by giving them tools that are going to make them more successful, I guess, with the more left brain things, or in just being able to process information that is given in that format academically, so they don't feel like they're always the odd man out?
Well, I think that we have to give them that firm foundation with a thorough phonics program, and we have to complete the phonics program. So we can't just let them get up and reading and then, pull that support out from underneath them. We need to continue. So they have all the tools to decode words, single syllable words and multi-syllable words. And then I think I would love if when we were all starting out, instead of singing the alphabet song and then thinking, oh, my kid knows all the sounds of the alphabet, somehow we think if you can sing the alphabet, therefore you're ready to learn to read. No.
Definitely not.
So in my dream world, kids would be introduced to learning to read in a multisensory way, like you were talking about, even at an older age with your son using clay. Clay is what we use in the Davis program, but it's not like Davis thought up clay. Clay's been around for forever. Kids have been making things out of Play-Doh. The particular clay that we use is really wonderful because it's very stiff and it gives a lot of tactile stimulation. But I would love to see parents, instead of going right to print, to just begin forming the letters of the alphabet in something. If you're not going to do it in clay, let them, draw in a cookie sheet filled with shaving cream or rice or flour or whatever. So there's some tactile input as to the shape of the letter. And as you're doing that, you can, go over the name of the letter if you want, or the sound that the letter most commonly makes, those kinds of things. So that's a 3-dimensional interaction where they're feeling it, and it's more multisensory and they're better able to integrate it into their head. They're the kids who want to take everything apart. And if we can, but words on a page, that's kind of difficult to do. So if you choose a medium like clay or shaving cream or whatever, just to introduce the very beginnings of letters and sounds. And then even like when I tutor a kiddo who maybe just is struggling, not dyslexic, but maybe struggling, we always just make all the letters out of clay, and then we'll do their phonics lesson with those clay letters rather than letters on a page, until such time as they're fully confident with the letters and the sounds that they make and whatever phonics role that we're working on at the time. So getting a kid involved physically.
So,
the best answer.
As they get older, what are some ways to help the student as they become a teen, or if they're still struggling? What are some ways that you can work with them to I guess give them better accessibility or accommodate, or I guess assistive technology, or those types of things that parents can do to help students?
Okay, so full disclosure, we were talking about this earlier, I am completely inept in all things technology. So, but I know there's like Learning Ally and where you can have textbooks read, and I'm sure there's a whole myriad of things that you can get on the tablet. But my bias is print. And of course, I also come at that with wanting someone to have had, if they need it, Davis Dyslexia Correction Program so they can interact with print. But if that, if you're not feeling that that's the right choice, I think that choral reading is a really wonderful way to support them as they're reading. And you could do this even with an older kid. And by that, I mean, you sit there next to them and you both have the same text and you read aloud together. If you need to simplify it, you can read a paragraph and have them read that same paragraph. You read a page, have them read a page. You read a page, they read the next page. And so the goal being to support them, to let them hear what it is they're going to read and then read it and support them so they are gaining confidence. And when you do choral reading, when you're sitting next to one another and you're reading that same passage, I'm kind of skipping around, I'm sorry. You're reading along accurately at a slower pace than what you might, zip through. We moms can really get cranked. You're reading through at a slower pace, and they're getting the accurate input of what those words say as they're tracking along with you on their book, which is positive reinforcement, accurate representations of what the words should what the words should sound like, and that's really, really helpful. It's also helpful if you, we need to hear our kids read aloud so we know, their areas of struggle. And so if you're going to ask your child to read aloud, so you don't send them into freak out mode, let them read the passage first so they familiarize themselves with it, and then let them read it aloud. Because some of us will never be good at reading cold. How many times in church when they're giving out verses and everyone's going to read a verse and you're not listening to what anyone else says, you're reading your verse so you can read it aloud correctly. So allowing them to read it first before you ask them to read aloud. Reading in chorus together at the same time. Getting a book on, an Audible book or a book on CD from the library or MP3 or whatever, and hearing it and reading along with the text in front of you is another helpful thing to do.
Yeah, we always use a Kindle reader because that has that function. I found out from my brother, and so he told my son, he goes, well, your Kindle, it's got this little button here and it reads the text to you. My brother's dyslexia is so bad that he wears a medical bracelet with his name and his address on it because he can't remember how to write it. Yeah. And so, he's a college graduate. His wife read everything to him, but he made it through, and he's a manager now. So there are ways to find your niche. Well, even if you still struggle, and some people do, they still struggle with reading even after a lot of things. And they sent their son through the Davis method up in Washington. Yeah. Okay. And so they were very happy to find. I think his main office is up by there. They live in Bellevue, so way up by the Canadian border. Okay. So anyways, but yeah, so that's one of those things you just don't know if your child is going to get to that point where they're successful. And they find out the quirkiest things too about what works. My son said to me, and I don't know if you can tell me why this is, but he said, I have the hardest time reading text in a book, but I can watch foreign films and read the captions for 2 hours straight and I don't get tired.
So that's an interesting point. So this is part of what the premise of the Davis method is that a dyslexic learner has a lower than typical threshold at which they get confused. And by that, I mean, you or I might just be able to press through something and not get confused and then get disoriented and where am I and what's happening. But a dyslexic thinker is much more sensitive to everything around them. They're sensitive to noise. They're sensitive to buzzing fluorescent lights, to the tag in the back of their shirt, the seam on their sock. They didn't have enough breakfast. They're just sensitive to all those things. But it works in their favor because if they're really interested, which is possibly what your son was, interested in the movie, that threshold for confusion goes way up. So my oldest son, who's dyslexic, the one who read at 9, was never much of a fan of school. And but he wanted to fly. He wanted to get his private pilot's license, and his grandpa gave him the lessons. And the kid taught himself to fly. Wow. He read through all the manuals, took all the tests, he did all the paperwork all by himself. because he was
That's
so
amazing.
motivated.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, obviously you have to study some things in school that don't light your fire. And so we need to give them tools to do that. But when they're motivated, they can read and accomplish, you know, amazing things. And just as a little tidbit to throw in, lest, well, as a parent, we worry, what will my kid, I see them struggling, so how will they function in life?
Exactly.
And so the statistics show that a dyslexic thinker is always average and usually above average in intelligence. And so they have so many unique and amazing ways of thinking, and that the rest of us just, you know, we just pale in comparison. So, but they do have to find their niche.
They do, yeah, and I love that in the book of, you know, The Gift of Dyslexia, and he talks about that, and I read excerpts out, because my son was 16, and I said, listen to this, you know, and it totally changed his composure and attitude towards school when we started approaching it as, this is not an issue, this is a gift. It's just packaged in a difficult way, because, you know, his pursuits and what he wants to do is very much storytelling and book, you know, and movie related. And here he can't read very easily. So that's a struggle. But, you know, God has it all worked out, and so it's just, you know, that's just the way it is. But so then another question I had was, you know, the characteristic crossovers. There's kids who struggle maybe in reading. What other subjects might they also struggle with? And then also, how else might you see it manifested in their behavior, you know, in their problem solving ability, even their motor skills? Okay.
So the first part of the question, and prompt me if I forget to address the other, it can show up in math. That's usually, well, of course, it could show up in science or history or whatever, where they're having to read by themselves, because that would be a challenge just because of the reading. But in math, it can be a particular problem because as we age and we get into higher level math, the word problems are full of words for which there's no picture. So that's the kicker for a dyslexic kiddo, like I'm talking about, a dyslexic kiddo who's a good candidate for a Davis Dyslexia Correction Program. And if I can back up just a bit. The premise is a dyslexic thinker thinks in images or pictures. So when they're reading along, they're creating an image in their head of what they're reading. When they come to a word for which there's no picture, the, from, of, to, through, all those, usually words on the Dolch sight reading list, words that are phonetically irregular, we call them trigger words, because they trigger this confusion. And the word we use for that in the Davis method is disorientation. So they're kind of, it's almost like they just lose focus. They go off in their imagination to try to resolve this confusion. Mm-hmm. When you're off in your imagination, you're not right there in the moment any longer. And so you're not, you know, whatever is happening on the page that you're reading is not getting into your head. So the reason this presents a problem in math is, you know, if I have 10 apples and I take 3 from them, I've got from, which is a trigger word. And so there's this confusion about, wait, they're picturing 10 apples and take 3 from, but they don't, the from doesn't give them a picture to right. You know, add to their story in their head. So oftentimes word problems can be a real challenge. So usually they understand the concepts of math. If you talk them through it, it's evident that they understand the concept. You often hear this. My older son did this as well. In algebra, he could see the answer. He could not work it in a sequential fashion, but he could see the answer. And so they understand the concept, but the words trick them up. So it often shows itself in math. Physically, they can be clumsy. And some of that has to do, again, with what I have said is disorientation. When we're disoriented, we're not really aware of where we are in space. So we can kind of be clumsy. Typically, they might be slower to learn to ride a bike. In this case, they're kind of one extreme or the other. They were either slow to ride a bike or they were the precocious bike riders, because oftentimes a dyslexic person will be very athletically inclined. So it's kind of either or. These are often our kids who have difficulty with the passage of time. They don't experience time passing in a typical way. It either moves way too fast for them or way too slow for them. So if you tell your child, Jack, I need you to get ready in 15 minutes and we're going to do blah, blah, blah. In 15 minutes, they think, what? There's no way. And so these are our chronic kids who have no idea that, 15 minutes has passed. They have no concept of that happened 2 weeks ago or whatever. So
interesting.
Sometimes we see an atypical interaction with time and their ability to keep track of time. Mm-hmm. Also, sometimes they'll have problems with the sequence that something happened, and that's because they have trouble with time. So they can't remember what came first and what came next. You go on a family vacation, all your other children can retell the sequence of events of the things you did, and your dyslexic kid gets all the events right, but not in the correct order. And it's because they might have been disoriented and they have missed the passage of time in a proper order.
Interesting.
Did I answer all those?
Yeah. And I definitely think so. And you had already said about stuttering. And so other speech problems, and you talked also about them using words in different orientations. And that probably has to do with, like you said, sequentially, they probably just don't process it right. And so it just comes out different. So that makes sense.
And the order gets switched. One of my favorite expressions, one of my sons used to say, instead of what in the world is this? He would say, what is this in the world? He got all the words in the sentence, got the order mixed up,
Interesting. Yeah. And that's, we just kind of brushed that off as, that's just them and they'll get it right eventually. And I remember my one son, he would always make up words, or if he couldn't say the word properly, he'd start his vocabulary was big because we couldn't understand so many words he said that he had to find one that we understood that was right to fit. So it eventually worked out. So I definitely want to get into some of the resources that you shared. And I know one of the questions we got, and I'm going to put that up on the screen too. She said, this is just perfect timing for our homeschool journey. I would like to hear about the beginning stages such as testing and resources. And I know we'll get into resources that you shared with me. But do you want to talk a little bit about testing and just what you recommend as far as what is helpful as far as testing and what really isn't, and what benefit would it be to the parent to have a child tested, or is it better to try out some things and not spend that money? And then if you hit a certain block, then how do you approach that?
Well, I guess if your insurance is going to pay for it, then the sky's the limit. Mm-hmm. However, the testing processes are usually kind of long and onerous for a kid. Mm-hmm. And if a child is already struggling and then they go to this test environment and they know when they're not getting the answers right, if you will, and that can just be an added stressor. So this is just my philosophy. Take it for what it's worth. I just think if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck and has web feet, it's a duck, So if you're thinking your child's dyslexic and if you have dyslexia in your family, you're probably right. So my take is, rather than spend the resources having this extensive test done, just pursue some of the things known to be helpful for a dyslexic learner and see what happens. Spend your resources, maybe getting a tutor or maybe buying a new curriculum or, whatever it is that you feel like might be the right fit for your kid. I'd spend the money there because if you go to an educational psychologist, which is one of the kind of main type persons who will do these educational testings, this educational testing, it's going to cost you a lot of money. And so, like I said, if your insurance is going to pay for it, maybe that's not an issue for you. But they're going to tell you specific things about, your child couldn't segment the sounds in words, or he couldn't replace the sounds in words, or he had some trouble with comprehension. And to me, all those things are just part of a dyslexic person's struggle, or just a struggling reader's struggle. So that's why I say, those specific things, are they so helpful to us as we go forward trying to help our kid? I don't know that I think they are. I think save your resources, save your time, just get right in and educate yourself. And that is huge. You know, I'm a huge believer in the Davis program, but I also think that there are other answers for other kids. I don't think that everybody needs this, but it's up to us as parents to do the research. And I'm probably going to step on toes here, but I think beyond the blog post and beyond the discussion board, we need to read books where they thoroughly explain something so we get a really good knowledge about that particular, you know, program or that particular idea or whatever. So I would say if your gut tells you your kid's dyslexic, it's one of two things. Your kid's dyslexic or your kid's struggling probably because of lack of a thorough phonics program. And so do that one first, do the thorough phonics program first, and then, you know, maybe you pursue something else. And I forget the other part of the question. What was the other part?
Just about resources, which we're going to go into, because you gave me a wonderful list. So I want to first put up the Gift of Dyslexia by Ron Davis, and that you can find on dyslexia.com. And so I'm going to just put that up on the screen for a second. And oops, got a little extra there. And so you can find his book on there, and also a description of the Davis method. And what else can you find on that site?
There's a little screening tool that I like. It's a very informal screening tool, you know, is your child dyslexic kind of thing. And it is really geared toward the kind of kids who would be well suited to the Davis program. And just as I say well suited to the Davis program, one of the criteria for a child to go through the Davis program with a facilitator. Now, if the parent decides to try it on their own, obviously that's different. But if they go through it with a facilitator, is they have to recognize that they have a challenge and they have to want help. And that's because the program all takes place up here. We're just teaching them how to think in a different way. And if the child doesn't feel they have a problem and is not motivated to help, they're not going to do it. So that little screening. Yeah, and you don't want to, you know, number one, you don't want to waste time and resources on something that your child's not doing. But to me, the greater tragedy would be you put a kid who's not interested in a Davis program, you put him through that program, and he didn't use what he's learned, and then at some later date, he may have the personal motivation, but he says, no, I did that Davis thing, it didn't work. Exactly. You know, it didn't work because it was not appropriate for him at the time. He wasn't motivated, or she wasn't motivated at the time. So,
yeah. Well, I have that experience. My parents took me to some counselors, and
yeah,
kind of backfired on them, unfortunately. Yeah. And later down the road, I realized, I really did need that. So take her advice if you have a teenager and a child is. Do some other stuff at home. It'll save you some money and a lot of heartache. So one of the other resources you shared was the Dyslexic Advantage.
Yes.
So what is that? And I'm just going to I'm not going to put up websites. I'm just going to put up titles. You can do a search on these on Google and find them easily. But I definitely wanted you, Beverly, to be able to talk about why this is an important book in your eyes, and what. Well,
I think because sometimes we react in panic to a diagnosis or just the mere thought that our child has dyslexia. Maybe we knew someone, and you know they ended up not fulfilling everything that they could in their life, and so we have this panic. Yeah. And so I feel like the Gift of Dyslexia is a positive take on dyslexia in that it presents it as a unique way of thinking. The Dyslexic Advantage, I think, is the first book that's been written that actually explores all the different ways that a dyslexic thinker leaves the rest of us in the dust, you know, in their ability to do things naturally that we could learn, the rest of us could learn, but it's natural for them. And so it's extremely empowering and affirming to read all the different chapters. And I loaned mine out, so I don't have it to read you some of the chapters, but all the very specific different ways. And it's not look what this person did in spite of their dyslexia. It's look what this person did because of their dyslexia. because they think in this different way, they were able to really flourish in this environment. And so it's not this one wasn't a paramedic and this one was a fighter pilot. It's not like that. It's a way of, these guys are visually spatial, global spatial thinkers, and they are, good at all these kinds of things. And so it's not like telling you what your child could be later in life. I'm not doing it justice. It's just very affirming and empowering, because just about everything else out there I find is, oh my gosh, there's something horribly wrong with my kid. And that's just not the case.
Yeah, no, I think my son said, well, it's like a superpower. I mean, all these superhero movies. I'm like, it really is, to be able to spatially move things that, you don't have to move physically. You can just do it in your head. So yeah. And so, but to see that and to be able, and when you read the book, I think, The Gift of Dyslexia did this. So this book must do it even more on that, but you can speak that truth and affirm your child with those things then after you read it and use it, to your advantage to keep them going too, because they do get so discouraged. And so to use it as ammunition that it will get better. I mean, the problem is, we put our kids in this box when we're schooling them, and we have to in some sense, to get them what they need. But when we launch them, they're able to use those gifts in such tremendous ways if they haven't been defeated through the process.
Yes.
And so
absolutely.
Definitely. And so the next one that you gave me was the shutdown learner. I'm going to put that up here. By Selznick. So, talks about the shutdown learner and spatial abilities. So what do you have, why does that stand out in your list?
Well, I should have prefaced my long list with, I'm such a nerd. Anything about learning or kids who struggle, I read, and each one becomes my favorite. But I think this one was really helpful for me when my kids were older and still struggling. So, some of my dyslexic sons we caught early, and we kind of, we knew about the Davis program. We helped them early. Others were later. So my one who was 13 when he went through the Davis program, he was beginning to quit. He was just done, and I don't blame him. He was tired. It was all a struggle. He was working twice as hard as everybody else for, a fraction of the results, and he was shut down. And we can tend to, as parents, want to label that a disciplinary issue and a character issue, and they're just worn out. And so this book really helped me as a parent recognize this is a legitimate thing. He has decided, okay, I'm done with this. I mean, who would beat their brains out for this long and still have a cheerful attitude? I wouldn't. And so it kind of helped me to see things from his perspective and offer more helpful support, and in the form of recognizing and affirming, yes, it has been hard, and we're doing everything we can, to make that better. So it's just sort of giving them permission to be tired of the burden, which is helpful for me.
Right. And I saw my son go through the same thing. It can be very defeating. I mean, he didn't even make it through. About halfway through his junior year, he just said, I'm done. I don't want to go to college, and I just want to learn what I want to learn. And I said, fine. I prayed about it, and God said, let him go. So it wasn't worth our relationship, and so you got to make those calls when you have to make those calls. So definitely.
Well, and I so admire your saying that, and possibly for some of the listeners whose children are young, that's really sent them into full-on panic mode. What? You're going to let your kid quit school and when the junior year arrives and they decide they're done? But as you said, you prayed about it, and the relationship was the most important thing, and we can never lose sight of that. There's nothing more vital than the relationship with our child. And, God shows the way to make it work for every kid. And it looks very different, I think, for our dyslexic learners.
It does. And I was so blessed that he wanted to take a gap year. He stayed home this year, and now he's doing all the social media for us at SPED Homeschool. And what a gift that is to me. I told him, you can't leave now. So you're right. I'm telling him. He goes, but I do. I want. So he promised me he'd stay till the end of the year. So I'm going to have to try to find somebody new. But he's been great because he challenges me. I mean, he sees what I need to see, and he tells me what I have to do. And he's not afraid to stand up to me, which I need. So it's been good for both of us.
That's good skills.
Definitely. One of the other resources you shared, and you said that I found out that it's Abigail Marshall. She's the manager of Dyslexia.com, but she wrote a book, the Everything Parents Guide to Children with Dyslexia. And I'm going to put that up on the screen and have you explain, if I can get it up there. There we go.
Yeah. So Abigail is actually I think her title is the webmaster for Davis Dyslexia. But what I so appreciate about her book is she has a very even-handed treatment of all the different things out there available to us. So sometimes when you read a book about dyslexia, someone has an axe to grind, and they don't want you to go any other place besides them, or they don't want you to have any other idea about how to fix dyslexia besides theirs. And she just sort of is this unbiased, this is Linda Newbell, this is Nighthouse, this is Erland, this is Davis, and I just find it a very helpful, or when it came out, I found it a very helpful treatment, honestly, respectfully, of all the different options out there to help you kind of narrow down, because you can't do everything.
Exactly.
Or even if you can, financially, that's probably not wise to try to do everything. So it's just as if you're starting.
With the stress either.
Oh my, yeah. So if you're just starting and you don't know where to start, I feel like, as opposed to like The Gift of Dyslexia, which is about the Davis method, her book is about all kinds of ways to help a dyslexic learner.
That's good, because when parents start out with a younger kid, that's their question. Where do I go? What do I do first? And there is no one perfect answer. Well, there's no one perfect answer to anything. Your child is unique, and you definitely, I always tell parents, if you have a piece about it, follow it. But if people give you lots of advice, just take it in, and then whatever you have a piece about, go with. But don't just panic and take the first advice you get.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh. And then there's this resource. It's The Secret Life of a Dyslexic Child.
So if you don't live with a grown-up dyslexic, so my husband's dyslexic, so he's always enlightening me and how the dyslexic mind work. This is a fabulous book to help you understand your kid. It's written by an adult, so he's able to articulate. And it just helps you see inside the mind of your child. And it's another one of those things. He kind of has a chip on his shoulder. I'll just put that caveat out there. He kind of has a chip on his shoulder. But he explains what your child may be seeing in their world and what they may be thinking about what's going on as you try to help them in a way that your child might not be able to articulate. So I just find it helpful. I mean, I'm looking at my bookshelf thinking, oh, wait, I should have pulled this one and this one and this one. Y'all think, all she's going to do is recommend books. But that was my point about we have to inform ourselves. And I think a book is a thorough way of informing yourself.
Yeah, I think so too. That's when I first started parenting. I knew I didn't have parenting skills at all. And so I would walk around, following my kids, and I had a book in my hand, and that's how I learned everything that, I learned. I just devoured books. And finally, it got to the point where, okay, I can start really applying this. It sunk in enough. But definitely, I agree. You can't get what you need in just a quick podcast or in video. They're good places to start, definitely. But you do have to educate yourself. It's like going back to school. And you have to educate yourself on how your child learns, how they react. I mean, you do that every day, but take notes. You know, it's you're not just a general observer. You definitely are a student within your school. You had some other ones for parents who really wanted to get in the thick of things, and I'm going to have us start going over those. If there's anybody that's watching that has an additional question, if you want to put that in, we're nearing the last 10 minutes of our time, and so I haven't seen any, but if you want to add anything in, that'd be great. Otherwise, we're just going to go through this list and
Can I
add in something? Yeah.
Well, I just want to make some specific recommendations for some phonics programs that might be helpful.
Definitely. Yes, please do.
So just to reiterate, what is considered the gold standard for, they say now for remediating dyslexic learners, it's an Orton Gillingham-based phonics program. So back in the day, when I was a kid, that's how we all learned to read, was an Orton Gillingham-based phonics program, because that's all that was out there. Yeah. But it was fallen out of fashion, and now that's the remediation that they use. And so you want a program that's Orton Gillingham based. Now, here's the things that we need to understand as parents. You don't need to go be trained at Nyhouse or Linda Bell or anything. You don't have, or Barton. You don't have to have any specialized treatment, because there are programs out there that are simple. They're written to the parent to administer, if you will, like a better word. They're written for the parent to use with the kid, and you can do it. You can really do it. So one of my favorites that's new is all about reading. Yes. It's very thorough. It's the books are very pleasing and non-distracting. There's a lot of white space between the lines.
Well, that's good.
They're just very easy on the eye. So there are other programs out there that are Orton Gillingham based that would probably be good for a dyslexic child, but they're very distracting. Lots going on, lots of colors, lots of things all over the page, and a dyslexic kid is going to be distracted by all that. So they do better with just one little section of text and a picture. So even the readers are really wonderful, all about reading, and you know it's a progression of levels. And I'm almost positive there's placement tests, but honestly, if I had an older kid, like a 9 or 10-year-old who's still struggling, I would go back to the beginning of a good phonics program and just breeze through what they prove themselves already to know, but just so you're picking up any tiny little gap that you might not know they have. So
I recommend that with math too. It's good to give them those. They feel so good because they accomplish so much and so fast, and you can go through all that stuff, and it catches those things. So that's great.
It catches the things that we might not realize that they missed. The other one that I like is not very well known in the South in homeschool circles. It's more popular up north, and it's by Reading Horizons, which is not the same thing as Horizons, but it's Reading Horizons. I'm sorry I didn't send these links. It's called Discover Intensive Phonics for Yourself. You can probably look that up later. So if you Google Reading Horizons, Discover Intensive Phonics for Yourself, you'll find the website. I think it's athome.readinghorizons.
Okay.
It is a wonderful, very simple, it's scripted. I really like a scripted thing. You should say this, you should do this kind of thing. Very simple, very gentle and slow. It's not lesson 1, lesson 2, it's lesson 1. And when they've proven themselves to be comfortable with this, then you move on to lesson 2 the next day. So it's not, one lesson one day, another lesson another day. There's an online version, which I do not prefer. I think a kiddo who's struggling needs a parent sitting right there with print right there in front of them. Maybe for help practice, an online thing would be okay, but for instruction, I really don't prefer the online version. Those are my 2 favorites. Okay. So let me just say a few things about, like, teach your child to read in 100 easy lessons, and tips on phonics, and there's just, and there's not to say that these are bad programs, but if you're listening to this interview, you probably need a program that's not like those, and one that is simple. And non-distracting, and layout. And so those two are my very favorite. And I use the Reading Horizons at home when I tutor a kiddo. That's still my favorite. I just like the layout. But so it's easy when you go to the conference to get distracted by all the pretty things. And those pretty things.
Point, and it's conference season, so yes.
Yeah. That can be hard for our kids. The distracting bells and whistles, wang, 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 kind of thing can be hard. So I just wanted to throw that.
I know. I pared down even our math program to something that was very simple. I looked through all the books to make sure there was, not any color because my son had such a hard time with it. We did Singapore math, and what even made it worse was it used objects from another culture, which of course got those words in there, and he's, thinking, what is a prawn? And the math problem is not being thought of at all. So definitely think about those things when you got these kids that are so spatial in learning, and they bring everything to the table when you're doing something so linear that most people don't have an issue with it.
Yeah,
but they do.
Yeah,
definitely. So you had a couple last ones for parents who are really into the thick of them. We can go through them really quick. I'm not even going to put them up, but No Mind Left Behind.
So that is a really wonderful one. You may hear about executive skills, and I'm drawing a total blank of my list of executive skills, and I did not get that one in front of me. This is like planning and
taking initiative.
Yes.
You said organizing, thinking flexibly, planning, self-monitoring, memory.
Yes.
Yep.
So what I love about this book is it gives you very concrete, specific things you can do to facilitate your child to learn those skills. So oftentimes when someone brings me a kiddo who's dyslexic and they want to have a program, some of the child's program is they can't attend to anything. No one's ever said, no, you need to sit right here. Now, there's a continuum, I realize, of ADD, and someplace ADD ends and discipline begins. And so, but I think we're not as equipped with practical things to do to help our children learn some skills, some self-monitoring skills. And that book has some very simple, concrete things to implement in your day to help your children learn to regulate themselves, to exercise initiative, to plan, to recognize the consequence of their actions, those kinds of things in very concrete ways.
Does it cover a multi-age range also, or is it specifically targeted to a certain age range?
Specifically, I don't recall, but I feel fairly certain that you could adapt. Anything could be easily adapted to your child.
Okay, that's great.
Are we gone?
No, I think it's just a little choppy right now. Well. So another resource that you had was Bright Kids Who Can't Keep Up. Oh, can you hear me now? Sorry, we're having a little bit of technical difficulty.
Are you still there?
Yep, I'm still here. There you go.
Okay.
So
we made it pretty far with that glitch.
Yep. Sorry, Tim. He's going to look at that and go, okay. So one of the other resources you had was Bright Kids Who Can't Keep Up. And that was, can't remember what that focused on.
It's on auditory processing.
Oh, yes.
For a kiddo who, and so oftentimes a kiddo who's dyslexic might also be labeled with an auditory processing disorder or slow processing speed or something. Some of that can be their personality, honestly, I think, and some of it can be disoriented, and they're not accurately perceiving their world, and therefore their sense of time is messed up. So if we're rushing them along, their clock is not running, the same way we're wanting it to run. And when we take them to someone to diagnose, we list all the things our kid does, and they say, oh, well, they have slow processing speed. That's why they can't keep instructions. So this is another book that gives some really wonderful concrete things that you can do in your home. And one of the things that we learned when we were taking my son everywhere trying to get help for him is quite a bit of what we were spending lots of money on. I could have done at home had I had one of these books that outlined it for me. Some very just simple things that we can do that just stack. They don't cure a problem, they're not going to cure dyslexia, but they stack the deck in your child's favor.
Yes, and that's a good point. Is that you're just giving them the ammunition that they need to be more successful. You fill up their trunk, as you say. When they can take it with them, because these become things that they own and they can carry into their adulthood with them. So, another one was reset your child's brain.
Oh yeah. So that's going to need lots of friends. Although since that book has been printed, there's much more awareness of the problem of passive screens, of phones, tablets, that kind of stuff. There's much more awareness of the problem and what it does to a child's brain. And so this book goes into all the scientific background, which, as I said, I'm a nerd. I like that kind of stuff. But she also gives you some specific ways. If you have a kiddo who's addicted to a device, and sometimes when we have a kid who struggles, that's the one thing they might love. And so we might, and I'm not talking about reading on a Kindle or something, but they might be escaping in a device. And so I just love that book because she says what nobody wants to say, which is get your kid off the device, because it's creating problems that are making the situation worse. And so, as I said, the whole first part of it is the scientific background of what's happening to our brain. And then the next part of it is, okay, you've convinced me. Now what do I do with my kid who's totally addicted to this phone? How do I get him off? So
yeah, and that's good to have some concrete advice, because I think you kind of you either, create a war or you just give up. One or the other.
Yeah.
So, and then you had different learners, and what does that cover?
EIDE, is that the author for that one?
By Healy?
Yes. Okay, so this is another issue, I think, of where we really have to understand, and you said this well, we have to be students of our kids. And it's real easy, and this is why I discounted the book, The Gift of Dyslexia, the first time I read it, is because it didn't make sense to me. I thought, well, nobody thinks like that, because I don't think like that.
You're right.
And so if you find yourself in that place, not being able to comprehend that someone might actually think in a different fashion, like, don't we all think the same? And the answer is no. This is just a really helpful book to affirm your child's way of thinking and help you to have a positive outlook instead of view their way of thinking as something that needs to be fixed. It helps you have a positive outlook and understanding of their way of thinking.
That's a good thing to have, definitely, because we tend to perceive the world from how we perceive the world, and it's not the same, and that's a hard barrier to push through. And as homeschooling parents, we have to, because all of our children are not like us.
No. It's really that easy.
No, they're the most difficult ones, the ones that are most like you. Oh. And then the last one is The Mind of Boys, and I think that's a great resource also, because we think that boys should learn like girls, and they don't.
Yeah. Anything that author writes, Michael Gurian, he has one called Boys and Girls Learn Differently. And he's also written books. I'm sorry?
I'm going to put up his website so that people can see it. But yeah.
He has done a lot of study about single gender education and about how girls learn and how boys learn. He doesn't just side with one. But I just recommend The Mind of Boys, since we're girls. And, we kind of know how our girls think. And so it's just helpful if we have boys to recognize they do, in fact, learn in a different way. And it's our job and our privilege as homeschool moms to facilitate that. And that Michael Gurian is an amazing author of just all kinds of stuff about children and how to help them learn and respect their differences in gender and how that affects how they learn.
Yeah. And it, unfortunately, the school doesn't have the ability to adapt to that, but you at home do. So, so take advantage of it and let your boys be boys. Definitely.
Yes.
So, all right. Well, I didn't see any more questions come in, so that ends our hour. But I have thoroughly enjoyed this, and I've learned a lot, and it's been fun to talk about this because, you know, with my son, we discovered this later on. We just struggled, and you know, his brother having Asperger's, he was the main issue in our family, and it was like, well, Tim gets by, and so, you know, unfortunately that just happens. But you know, God is good. He helped us to conquer it later in his life, and that's not a bad thing. It's just what it was. And so I just want to encourage parents wherever you're at. You know, this information that Beverly has shared is just wonderful. I'm just thank you for, you know, pouring your years of research and knowledge and experiences into this 1 hour broadcast, because it's going to help a lot of parents, I definitely think, who see themselves at this crossroad. What do I do? My child is not reading. And there's a lot.
Well, it's been my pleasure to participate this way. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. All right. Well, thank you so much. And I'm going to sign us off. And I just want to thank you for joining us for SPED Homeschool Conversations. This is a weekly broadcast that we do, and it's sponsored by SPED Homeschool. And you can find us on our website at spedhomeschool.com. And also you can find us on our Facebook page, which is the SPED Homeschool page. And we broadcast live this show on our Facebook support group. And then we broadcast it on Podomatic on that, and also on YouTube when it's recorded. So we put that up usually on Sundays. So thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you next week. Next week, our interviewee is Suzanne Goss, who is the author of Flip Flop Spanish. And she's going to talk to us about how to teach a foreign language to any learner. And so I'm excited on how she's going to bring that in and make it multisensory. And so she said she's sending me flashcards ahead of time, but I don't think it's going to help me learn my Russian. But I might learn a little more Spanish. So anyways, we'll see you next week. Thank you for joining us. And I'll definitely be on the support group and talk to you there. Bye.